This is the Greenbrier Valley Church of the Nazarene with your daily devotion for Thursday, October the 29th. Today we are reading out of the book of 1 Timothy chapter 5 verses 1 through 10. And this was a letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. Treat younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, and younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. But if a widow has children or grandchildren, they should learn first of all to put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents. For this is pleasing to God. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask for God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. Give the people these instructions so that no one may be open to blame. Anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. No widow may be put on the list of widows unless she is over 60, has been faithful to her husband, and is well known for her good deeds such as bringing up children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, and devoting herself to all kinds of deeds. And the focus verse that Carol Rittenhouse is writing about today is the 5th verse. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and ask for God's help. And Carol's article is titled An Ever-Present Help. Carol writes, in the winter of 2001-02, my dad was in his last few weeks of life this side of heaven. As cancer devastated his body and mind, my family and I were left with the daily responsibilities for his care we could never have imagined before that awful diagnosis. It was lonely and isolating. During those days, I became aware of God's presence every single day. I had to rely on God's new mercies every morning or I would collapse in grief. The widow in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 5, had a difficult life. She apparently had no relatives to care for her. She was alone. Or was she? Finding herself in an impossible circumstance, she did the only thing she could do. She relied continually on God's provision. While it was completely within God's ability to rain bread out of the heavens and water from rocks, God instead provided for the woman's needs through His church. Just as the widow needed to depend on God's continued help, so must the church. Without a consistent daily outpouring of God's grace, how will the church know where to serve? May we never be so reliant upon our own understanding that we lose the ability to depend on God. The hymn is Constantly Abiding by Annie S. Murphy. Constantly abiding, rapture divine. He never leaves me lonely, whispers, oh so kind, I will never leave thee. And in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 6, we read, but Christ is faithful as the Son over God's house, and we are His house, if indeed we hold firmly to our confidence and the hope in which we glory. That is your daily devotion for Thursday, October the 29th. Have a wonderful day.